So in previous debates on this topic, Andrew said, and I quote, women only have rights because men allow them to have rights, and women can't make decisions about their own rights because they can't enforce their own rights. So basically, what Andrew is saying here is that there's a fundamental power indifference between men and women that precludes women from physically enforcing their own rights and must always appeal to men to enforce those rights. This, Andrew claims, is a paradox. If women do, in fact, get equal rights, it will be because men allow them to, which then logically necessitates that the women never really had rights in the first place because the men could easily say no to the women and there's nothing the women can do about it. Thus, men and women are fundamentally unequal. I think this shows a fundamental misunderstanding of power, more specifically how women actually use power. And Andrew's conception of power and influence is coming exclusively from a masculine worldview. And here's what I mean. The dictionary definition of power is the following: the capacity or ability to direct or influence the behaviors of others. And as an example of the most obvious way of exercising your power, I want to give you guys a little bit of a thought experiment. It's going to sound kind of ridiculous, but bear with me. It'll make sense in a second, okay? So imagine there's two guys standing on an island. One is Andre the Giant. The other is Danny DeVito. Danny DeVito wants to create a whole system of ethics and rules for them to follow while they're stuck on the island together. And this requires Andre to follow a system of rules which he doesn't like and he thinks is annoying. So Andre the Giant is just like, no, I don't feel like it. And there's literally nothing Danny DeVito can do about it, obviously, because of the size difference. However, let's expand this analogy and say that there's actually 100 inhabitants on the island. The same event occurs. Danny DeVito comes up with his code of ethics. Andre the Giant rejects it, except this time, Danny, being the clever little man that he is, appeals to the rest of the inhabitants on the island. And nobody's even close to being the same size as Andre, but Danny is super likable, gregarious. He's a fun guy, and he wins the hearts of the people of the island to become their leader. Danny then decides, Andre the Giant, you're not really pulling your weight. Start actually working for us, or I will kill you. How can little Danny DeVito make a threat like this? He has the power of numbers on his side. No matter how powerful Andre the Giant is, if even 10 of the 100 inhabitants on the island try to physically subdue him under the influence of Danny DeVito, Andre has no shot. I bring this little thought experiment up to prove to all of you that power doesn't have to be just physical. In fact, that's actually the lowest form of power. Real power is having an influence over those who can enforce your will on other people. So this begs the question then, how do women play into this? Women exercise power in a very similar way that Danny DeVito did in that thought experiment, except it's actually even more subtle than that. The book, The Art of Seduction by Robert Greene, in that book, he states that some of the best seducers throughout history have been women. One more thought experiment to prove my point. This one will be quicker, I promise. Let's take the Danny DeVito example again, and let's say he has no problem with Andre the Giant's lazy ass, but then the hot girl of the island, driven by her hypergamous nature, hooks up with Danny, because he's the one in power, and becomes his girlfriend. Let's just call her Stacy. Stacy doesn't like Andre. She thinks he's creepy and lazy, so she influences and seduces Danny into making Andre the Giant work, or else he's going to get kicked off the island. In this situation, who is the one with the power? If you said that it's anybody other than the girl, you fundamentally do not understand power as a concept. This doesn't just need to be a thought experiment. This has actually been happened multiple times throughout history. Cleopatra had the ear of Julius Caesar and used Julius Caesar to conquer her enemies, more specifically her family. I'm not going to do a whole history lesson here. There's also someone named Madame de Pompadour who basically ran all of France, even though she was basically a prostitute. She was like King Louis XV's favorite courtesan. So yeah, and there's many others too. Yeah, if you want more examples, just read The Art of Seduction by Robert Greene. I'm sure a lot of you guys already have. Another example that's very relevant to this discussion. Women only gained the power to vote in the United States because of women, not because of men, as I'm sure Andrew probably believes. The 19th Amendment, which gave the women the right to vote, resulted in a tie. The tiebreaker being a young Tennessee legislator named Harry Byrne, who initially was going to vote against women's suffrage. Then his mom wrote him a letter and basically shamed him into voting for women's ability to vote. And that's what he did. And then the law was passed. And now today we have for better or for worse, women can vote because of that happening. Now, in that situation, Harry, technically, the Tennessee legislator, is the enforcement mechanism. Because unless he votes yes, women will continue to not have the right to vote. However, you would be extremely naive to think that Harry was the one in power here. Do women need men to enforce their rights? Yes. Does that necessarily mean that men are the ones in power? No. To directly respond to Andrew's claims that women only have rights because men let them have rights, women only have rights because the people in power allow them to have rights. The people in power are not always men. On paper, it might be, but as the story of Cleopatra, Madame de Pompadour, and the mother of Harry Burns shows, to think that the ones who are the leaders on paper are always necessarily ones pulling the strings is a very naive way of viewing the relationship dynamics between men and women. So yeah, that's my opening statement.
So it's kind of a gift gallop, but I'll try to get through it all. And then we'll get right back to the fundamentals of the argument. And Kevin's going to lose again because he's brought literally nothing new to the table. So here, let's just go through this real fast. First part of the argument, he's wrong about. He says there's a second half that Andrew hasn't thought about, this fool, this idiot, which is that, you know, he brings up this Danny DeVito, Andre the Giant thing. Notice how both the people inside of this analogy are men. He gives you a weaker man and says the weaker man is maybe better at subterfuge or public speaking or this type of thing. So other men, he can control other men to go enforce the things that he wants. Well, no shock to me. This happens all the time. I literally have there's no shock value in that for me. He points out that women can manipulate men in order to enforce their rights. I agree that that's also true. I've been through this now, I don't know how many times. I don't know why he hasn't picked that up, but I agree that both those things are true. But it still doesn't change the fact that the rights themselves are enforced by men, which makes it paradoxical to say that we can have egalitarianism with women, which is the crux of the position to begin with. Some of the fundamentally flawed thinking that Kevin here has when it comes to power dynamics is a claim that I don't understand them. You just think it's raw force, Andrew. Well, no, I don't think it's just raw force. I just think that when it comes down to it, the enforcement arm of whatever it is a person's will to power is going to be force. It has to necessarily be force. Laws have to be enforced by force. Will has to be enforced by force. If your machinations and manipulations and things like this don't work out and you have to then bank on the law, you have to use force. There's no way around it. So, I mean, kind of with that, I think we can get into it, but let me end it with saying that another fundamentally flawed part of Kevin's argument is he talks about this legislature who was the deciding vote in women's rights. But he actually messes up and he says, at this point, Harry was the enforcement arm, but he wasn't the enforcement arm. He was the lawmaker. All the police and all of the military and all of those people who are largely designated as men and still are to this day globally and always will be, were the actual enforcement arm. So if those men had said, no, we're not going to go and give women the right to vote, well, Harry would have been fucked, right? And that's just the truth. So kind of with that, I'll open it up, but I sure hope there's a better argument.
Why does the enforcement arm matter?
Because how do you have rights without enforcement?
Okay, that's fine. But you're acting as if
I asked you a question.
No, you didn't.
I
just said
you
don't have rights
without
enforcement.
how do you have rights without enforcement, Kevin? Answer my question.
No, you need enforcement for sure.
You have to have
to give you credit,
rights.
Yeah, to give you credit in your previous, I don't think that in your previous debates you said that rights are a social construct. I totally agree.
There's not even anything left to debate. You're not going to have anything.
No. There still is. There still is. There still is.
All right.
Yeah. Because me as a Nietzschean, my fundamental worldview is the will to power. I believe that there's always these forces of power that are constantly clashing against each other to try to will themselves. Sometimes they'll integrate that smaller power, or they'll just take over completely. No, my issue is that I don't think that the enforcement mechanism, so let's say these men, for example, is even remotely relevant. Because the enforcement mechanism can be anything, and really what matters at the end of the day are the people at the top of the hierarchy that are making the commands.
It can't be anything except force.
I'm not disagreeing with that.
Well, then
I think you actually just dodged my question.
You just said it can be anything, Kevin. You said the enforcement mechanism.
No. Yeah. Hold on. Force is implied within the word enforcement mechanism, right?
Well, then it can't be anything. It's force.
Yes, it is force, and I'm saying the
Well,
people
then that's
who are
not
doing the
can be.
force could be different. Okay, so for example, it doesn't even need to be people.
What are you
If I had a
talking about,
nuke,
bro?
no, hold on. If I had a nuke, what's more effective, a nuke or an army of men?
It depends on the situation.
Okay, so two armies are two places are about to go to war. Let's say the United States. We have nukes, and then you have Iraq, or whatever country that doesn't have nukes,
Yeah, I would
but
say
has an
that the nuke.
amazingly large army. I mean,
Yeah,
you
I'd
could
say that
see
the
that in the
nuclear
second
arms
Gulf
in
War.
that situation are better. Sure.
Yeah. Okay. So the enforcement mechanism doesn't necessarily have to be men.
No, it's force, and it's men in both those situations.
No, it is force. Yes. It
And
doesn't
it's
have to be
men.
men with nuclear weapons.
Yeah, it does.
Why? Explain.
Because you can't have women who are entrusted to nuclear arms because men would have to entrust them with them, Kevin.
Well, okay. So if the
So
president
name
of the
me the
United States,
nation of women with nukes, Kevin. Where
I'm
are
not
the
saying
where's
that.
the
I'm not
nuclear
saying that. I'm
proliferation
saying that it
of
could
full of
actually be-
Amazonian badass spear chucking women, Kevin? Where is
all
it?
right. So back in 2016, if Hillary Clinton, God forbid, I wouldn't have voted. I didn't vote for her, but God forbid she was the president, then she would have the power there for sure.
No, she wouldn't have the power. The enforcers would always actually have the power.
Like the nuclear launch codes and stuff. She is the
Yeah, you know that those go through a chain, and then men have to turn little switches, and they have to push
Yes,
little buttons.
and you understand change of.
She doesn't just.
You
Press
understand
the button
chain
and
of
the nuke
command,
go.
right? Hold on. You understand chain of command, right?
I do understand
chain of command. You have to follow what
you do
your
understand
superior officer says.
What's a mutiny?
Of course, I know what a mutiny is.
Yeah, okay, well, if you know what a mutiny is, what if people say to Hillary Clinton? What if men say, "No, bitch, we're not gonna launch the nukes, and you can go fuck yourself"? How would Hillary Clinton enforce her power except to go to other men and tell them to make these men launch the nukes? Can you tell me that, Kevin?
Yeah, she'll send other men to go.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah,
so,
I'm not
again,
disagreeing with you on the enforcement mechanism. Hold on. No, I'm not. I said in my very statement,
then there's nothing.
I'm not against the enforcement argument.
There's nothing to debate then, unless you can. Here, let me break this down.
Oh,
unless you can. Yeah, I'm sorry. Take care of your ring light, but listen very closely. Unless you can explain to me how women have rights outside of the enforcement, and that the enforcement arm can be something other than force by men, you don't have anything to debate with me on. Nothing.
No, yes, we do. Yes, I do. It's because the people at the top of the power hierarchy, the ones who are actually manipulating and causing the people to actually enforce those things, that is where the actual power game is held. Okay. So if somebody at the top of a hierarchy, right? So who has more power? Napoleon, or let's say Napoleon with his army, or let's say some Yahoo with an equally
interesting
strong
that
army.
you bring up. Interesting that you bring up Napoleon, for instance, because even in this example, you would be wrong. Napoleon was a revolutionary, and he, as a general, gathered a bunch of men to oppose the power structures of France before he took it over and declared himself the emperor. And then a bunch of other men from another nation under Arthur Wellesley decided to whip up the entire British military, and the whole world went to war with Napoleon of men, I might add. What do you mean when you're talking about enforcement, that there can be anything?
My entire point, please, Andrew, I don't know if you're being deliberately obtuse, but look, my entire argument is that power comes from the top and it trickles down, right? So can you please, you keep going to the enforcement mechanism. We already agree there. What I'm saying is power comes from the top. Hold on.
Yeah, power
comes from the top, and women can influence the power at the top. I gave you historical examples: Cleopatra, Madame de Pompadour.
So what?
What do you mean?
That doesn't contend with the argument for the last time, for the 300th time.
That is no. That is their way. That is women's way of willing their power and willing their influence.
Kevin,
is by manipulating men.
Power comes from the bottom, Kevin. Now contend with the argument.
No, it doesn't.
Who cares?
No.
Who cares? Contend with the argument. How do women have have rights outside of paradox if the enforcers of their rights can only be men, and men are the only ones who can actually will men to power? They're the only ones.
No. That's where you're wrong there. Okay, you had me up until that point. Men are not
hang
the only ones who can will
other
men to power.
Stop, Kevin. I misspoke. I didn't mean men are the only ones who can will men to power. I just mean men are the only ones who can enforce the power of will. That's what I mean to say.
Well, let me actually, I want to provide clarity. So, Kevin, do you agree with the statement that men are the only ones that can enforce power, or no?
For the historically, yeah. I mean, you could make the argument, and I said it a little bit earlier, of like, okay, well, with modern technology, which was invented by men, you could have nukes and stuff that are commanded now by women, thanks to the labor of men. That's true. My argument is not the enforcement mechanism,
Okay.
because at the end of the day, what
Then
this
there's no
argument is about. Yeah, yes, there is.
No, there's not.
At the end of the day, what this argument is about power and the fundamental differences between men and women and how they interact with each other and whether they're equal or not.
They can't.
And I would say,
So I think I understand what the disconnect here is. So let me just quickly try to sum it up. So Kevin is arguing that then when it comes to power, right, when it comes to rights, the people who are enforcing are less important than the people at the very top, right? The people who are giving the orders. He's saying those are the people who are in more positions of power. And if those people are women, like, Hillary Clinton could have been, or Kamala Harris or whatever, then, women do have a lot of power and then can give themselves rights. Again,
I gave myself a bunch of historical examples.
They only have power.
Andrew's provided zero. The only argument you've provided is a monolithic argument of like in previous debates where you say, oh, if all men collectively banded together and said women don't have rights. Name me one time that's ever happened in history, Andrew. Ever.
It happens in Muslim nations all the time. Would you like me to go through the Muslim nations that's happened in?
Sure, go ahead.
Okay, well, let's start with Iran and the Shah of Iran and the overthrow of the Shah of Iran, where women did have rights, and now they don't. They don't have any because men collectively got together and said, fuck you, bitch, you don't have any. Do you dispute that, Kevin?
No, hold on. It's the men that it wasn't all men, right? A lot of those men were still fought with the women because they were influenced by the women. Now they lost,
so what?
Sure.
So what? So women were appealing to men to enforce their rights again.
Yes, exactly. No, you're making my argument. You're making my argument for me. My entire point is that is the way in which women exert their power is through manipulating men. The entire manosphere space is a result of that, of the manipulative nature of women who are able to control men. Now, just because
never
that it's not
that women can manipulate men, Kevin. Nobody's ever disputed that, Kevin. It's never been disputed once by me, Kevin. Ever, Kevin.
Yeah. So why are you deliberately?
Why don't you tell me
why are you deliberately avoiding my argument that power comes from the top?
I'm not sure.
And in which women could have. Hold on. Wait, do you agree with that statement? Wait, Andrew, do you agree with that statement? Yes or
Kevin,
no?
Calm down. Let's try this. Whether or not it comes from the top or the bottom or the left or the right or diagonally, or it comes from outer space fucking aliens, or it comes from groundhog people, I don't care where it comes from. All I know and need to know about power dynamics and how they work is who the fuck enforces them, because you don't have any power outside of who enforces your power for you, Kevin.
Yes, yes. Who enforces it, and then who influences the people that enforce it? That is the thing that matters.
But there's the trick with the paradox, isn't it? Because that would mean that the power that you think you have is illusionary, and really it's only dependent on people who have real power, and the people who have real power would be any male collective which opposes you. Then you're fucked.
Yes, it's male collective that has a hierarchy. Do you agree that any male collective will always have a hierarchy? Yes or no?
Of course.
And the hierarchy, the person at the top, chain of command, like we talked about with armies and stuff, is the one that's actually giving the commands. Yes or no?
Sure.
Yes. Okay. So that necessarily, you just basically admitted then that power absolutely comes from the top, and that is the most important aspect of it. And what I'm saying is that women can and do oftentimes throughout history. Again, I have historical examples that I listed out earlier of them having influence of people at the top of the hierarchy, which then trickles down, like I said. It all comes down to up here. It doesn't matter down here.
The thing I've never disputed and doesn't even fucking matter to any of the points that I'm making. Sure,
it 100% matters.
How does it matter?
It matters because your entire point is saying that women don't have rights.
Well, let's say, for instance, it was tumbled 360 degrees, and somehow it was logically possible that power came from the bottom instead. It always had to come from grassroots. It couldn't really come from the top down, right? It wouldn't matter, really. All that would matter is, how do those people then enforce power? And the answer is going to be what, Kevin? How would they do it? How would they do it? They would do it
I think you're strawmanning me this entire time.
They would do it by using enforcement.
When have I ever said, Andrew, when have I ever said, please list it out to me, that you don't need an enforcement arm? I literally said earlier in the debate that it is within the entire word itself.
You did, which is why I told you there's no debate, and you're just like still going on. I don't know why. There's no debate. You already agree with me, so I don't even know what you're talking about.
No, I do not agree with you.
You do.
in the
You
slightest.
you just don't know.
No. You think that it starts from the bot, or you don't. You actually admitted, I should say. So you conceded
no
that
admittance.
power comes from the top.
There's no admittance to something that's obvious. It just doesn't matter.
Okay, let me see.
Power
if I can
comes.
really bridge
Hey, it doesn't matter. Did you understand? It doesn't matter
let
where
me-
it comes
hang on,
from.
guys. Let me see if I can bridge the gap. So what I think the disconnect is that in terms of power and rights, Kevin believes that it's the people at the top who largely matter. He acknowledges that enforcement is predominantly male, right? He believes that's less important than the people at the top. And I think, Andrew, what you're saying is that who's at the top is not as important as who's doing the enforcing. Did I sum up both of your arguments correctly?
Yeah, whoever's doing the enforcement is actually the people who are at the top, regardless of who you think is at the top. Whether they know it or not, the enforcers are the people who have the power. We know this because when they stop enforcing, you no longer have any power, since those are always going to be men. Always going to be men. Men are the ones who necessarily give rights to other men and other women. So my entire proposal here is just simply that egalitarianism with women is impossible and paradoxical. I still haven't actually heard an argument from Kevin for how any of that is incorrect. Not a single one.
So I said it a million times. I don't want to keep repeating myself. I'll give an example, I want to ask you a question, actually. So women have the right to vote now where they used to not. How did that happen? In the U.S.
Yeah. So essentially a bunch of communist agitators began to fund and form the suffragette party, which was supposedly a grassroots movement, but really wasn't a grassroots movement, and a push towards giving women the vote. And then there was anti-suffragettes who pushed against that. And it was a political fight over basically voting rights.
Okay. So it wasn't a bunch of men who were just sitting around one day being like, you know what? We men are all powerful. Women can't vote. You know, it'd be a great idea if we could just get women to vote, get women to start voting. You agree that that's probably not what happened, right?
Well, I mean, that would be an oversimplification, but I do think it was mostly men who were behind the movement. Yeah.
You think it was mostly men behind the movement to get women to start voting?
Yeah. Well, I mean, this is known. Yeah, that's known. Who do you think funded it all? It was all funded by men. It was pushed by male media outlets.
Okay, fine. So what was the motivation behind that, though? What was the motivation behind that?
Behind moving women? Why? Because of the tax base. They were looking to double the tax base, essentially.
Okay, but women were already still working back then, weren't they?
Not the numbers that no, not even.
Well, hold on. Income tax Income tax didn't exist until I think 1920.
Why would income tax matter? You can
because you just mentioned the tax base.
Yeah, but that would just mean more people who are inside of your nation who are buying goods. You tax the goods.
They're still buying good, like they're still buying goods. What are you talking about?
Yeah, dude, look,
women were still working back then. So it's different to say women's working rights versus voting rights. They were already working back then.
So no, they weren't working in mass back then. I don't know what you're talking about. They weren't.
Really, during the Industrial Revolution?
Yeah, they weren't working in mass.
Women in the...
There were women who worked, but they weren't working in mass like men were, no.
And the thing that changed it is...
And by the way, it was men in Congress. Movement? It was men in Congress in 1913 who passed it anyway. So, I mean, like, what the fuck are you talking about, bro?
Influenced by women. My entire point is that all of this
They were mostly influenced by dark money and men, not women. But even, let's just say for a second that they were... But let's just say for a second that they were completely 100% influenced by women. 1,000%. There wasn't a single man who influenced even one of those congressmen. Not one, Kevin. It was all women, and they manipulated these men into giving them the fucking rights that they wanted to. No, let's say they passed it. Let's say they passed it. Let's say they passed it the next day, the very next day, and then they said to everybody, women can now vote. And then all the poll workers and all the police officers and all the military were like, fuck you, they cannot. What would it have meant? Would it have meant anything, Kevin? Would the law mean anything if nobody enforces the law?
Okay, so no, what ends up
No.
happening then? You keep speaking in monolism as if like the all of men. When have all of men
When you're
ever
talking about
collectively
women's right
rose
to
up
vote,
against
that's a
all of women?
monolith. Women's right to vote was a monolith. What are you talking about? That was an actual
No,
monolith.
I'm talking about the enforcement, the people who would say, "Oh no, we're not allowing this."
Yeah,
What
the
do you think would happen,
enforcement-
Andrew?
the
No, no, no,
enforcement is
no. Let's
basically a
actually go with
monolith.
this. Let's actually go with this thought experiment. So, what do you
Okay.
think realistically would happen if all of the if a bunch of the men, it's impossible to have all the men, a bunch of the men said, "Hey, actually, no, women don't have the right to vote, and we're not going to allow this." What do you think would realistically happen after that?
I think
curious to
realistically
truly
that
know your
Congress would probably reconvene very quickly and pass a law in order to keep their power in place to repeal it as quickly as possible. That's what likely would
No.
happen. Same thing
No.
that happens now when men decide not to enforce the laws that are going on in the book. For instance, let's
No.
take the Black Lives Matter riots. When police officers refused to respond during Black Lives Matter and the riots that were going on thereof, there was laws that were there that were being broken all over the place, but there was nobody around to enforce anything for you, Kevin. So what happened then is that people started to enforce their own shit. They started to enforce their own moral codes. They started to enforce their own morality. They started patrolling their own neighborhoods. They started doing this kind of thing. Why did they do that? Why did they
You're
do
making
that?
my point for me. I think you're making my point for me, and you don't even understand that you're doing it right now.
Well,
My
then your
entire
point
point
might
is
just
hold
be
on,
my
hold on,
point.
hold on. No. The entire point is if you did have people who resisted against that, and then let's say in this scenario, Congress, they wouldn't reconvene. They've never reconvened after passing a law and repealed it immediately. And in fact, I mean, you think of things that pass in American history, like the Whiskey Rebellion, stuff like that, like they will quell that rebellion. So instead, what they will do is they will gather up their men, and then they will have
the army
a fight
did
in
it.
a war.
Yeah, because the army did it, right? But if the army said no, we're not going to go quell the rebellion, then what, Kevin? Then what happens?
I don't know.
Then
man.
your law
I mean,
doesn't.
what is,
Yeah, you don't know because your law doesn't mean shit. Your law doesn't mean shit, Kevin.
You keep going into these scenarios that have never happened and
Yeah,
will never
it's
happen.
never happened
And-
that there's
hold
been
on.
mutinies. Okay, Kevin.
It necessitates that all men collectively band together,
Does it
which
necessitate
never
that?
happens.
Never has necessitated that. In fact, it only necessitates that small groups of them do so. They can ignore orders. They've done that in the past. They can have glorious revolutions. They've done that in the past. They can fight off the British from an entirely different continent like they did in our past. They can have a civil war and ignore the laws of the land like they did in the 1800s, Kevin. They can do all kinds of fucking things to ignore the enforcement arm or become a brand new enforcement arm. This idea that you have, this stupid fucking idea that you made up out of the blue, which makes no sense to me, is no, Andrew, power comes from the top. And so these are complex power dynamics. Okay, fair enough. They're complex power dynamics. But all you need to know what's true is who enforces those power dynamics. That group necessarily is going to have the power. There's no way logically around that. If you can give me an argument against that, which you can't.
I can, and I have previously, and I'll do it again, but I'll do it from a different standpoint this time. You have one, we agree that it's impossible to just have like all men agree on one thing. Whatever. There's always going to be some sort of resistance who are also other men. Yeah. So these two different armies are always going to be clashing.
Yes.
It necessitates that there's going to be conflict. Yes. Right?
Men can take men's rights away and give them. Yes, that's correct.
Yes, these two armies are end up going to be clashing against each other.
So
now, what's going to determine? Hold on. What's going to determine which one of those enforcement arms win in the end?
Whoever has the biggest guns.
That is a naive way of looking at it.
Really? Why don't you give me a historic example where that wasn't the way it was looked at? Because that's what's always happened every single time. When you have
Germany lost in World War II.
That's right.
They had better technology and they had better guns and
they took on the whole fucking world. The entire fucking world, and the Soviets invaded. So what happened when you had two different men, right, who had two different ideas about enforcement, and the men went to war? The men killed. I mean, you're talking about 2/3 of France, which died between World War I, World War II, who were males. The men were still in charge of France, even though the women were ridiculously, as far as ratio, outnumbering the French men. They were taking on American husbands and everything else, but the men still had the power because the men were still the enforcement. The men are always the enforcement. You say,
I don't know if there's a little bit of
hang on, Kevin, let me finish my point. Let me finish my point. Let me finish my point. Let me finish my point, and I'll kick it back to you. Again, for the 300th time, yes, men will fight over power, but they're ultimately the enforcers of what your rights are going to be, and they're the ultimate enforcers of what the law is going to be. They always are. There's no way around that. Even if you have Cleopatra in power, she's going to be relying on men to do the rights enforcement, Kevin. There's nothing you can do about that.
I'm not disagreeing with that.
So I don't know what to tell you.
That. This is like the 5th time that I said that I didn't disagree with that.
And there's nothing to argue with me about for the 300th time.
There is. I think you just don't want to admit to conceding the point. That's really what it comes down to.
There's no point for concession. What's the point I'm supposed to concede on? Let's try with that. What am I supposed to concede on?
The point you're supposed to concede on is that power comes from the top, and power from the top can and has been influenced by women. And your entire argument is that doesn't matter because the enforcement arm is always going to be men.
Never disputed it. In fact, it's part of my
that it can be women at the top?
Yes, of course. It's part of the crux of my argument, Kevin, for the 300th time.
When?
It's been stated over and over that women can influence men in order to enforce their rights. That would necessarily include a woman at the top of some fucking arbitrary hierarchy. It doesn't matter. They're still going to be banking on men to enforce their rights, Kevin.
Yeah, so
then egalitarianism is an impossibility. Always.
No, it is a possibility. Yes. You just proved it right there. That men and women express their will to power differently. Women do it through manipulation. Men do it through force. If the women are the ones that are manipulating the men, who is at the top of the hierarchy? The women. Boom. Debate's over.
They're not at the top. They're not at the top of the hierarchy. If the banking of enforcement of men can instantly turn around and take away all of their enforcement mechanism for their power. They're still endlessly begging men for their rights. Even if if they're queen, the empress of the whole world, empress of the galaxy, it wouldn't matter. They're still going to endlessly be begging men to enforce their rights. Men themselves, though, they don't have to do that. They don't have to because they're the enforcement arm themselves. That's why traditionally you always see men in power. There's not much you can do about that, and there's not much you're ever going to be able to do about that.
Sure, that tends to happen, but that doesn't necessarily. I feel like I keep repeating myself. The entire point is that
you're not arguing with my point.
No, you're not arguing with my point, dude. I've cogently
I've
completely laid out exactly what I said.
I've conceded everything you've said. It just doesn't mean anything comparatively. It doesn't mean anything to what I'm saying. Why don't you understand this? The paradox exists, even if I concede all of Kevin's points, which I've never run away from. I've always said it's true. There's nothing to argue. What is there to argue? What are you talking about?
The paradox is debunked.
No,
officially.
The paradox is
if you accept everything that I just said, the paradox is completely debunked. So let me bring up the paradoxes again. And again, direct quotations from you so I can debunk it to your face once more. Okay. Let me see. Where is it? Sorry, I have a lot of notes here. Okay. Women only have rights because men allow them to have rights. So that was one quote. Women can't make decisions about their own rights because they cannot enforce their own rights. Again, I said at the beginning of my statement, these are claims that I fundamentally disagree with because the way in which women influence men.
You got one of those wrong.
Okay.
You got the first one
I'm
right.
pretty sure
But you got the second one wrong, which isn't that women can't make decisions. It's just that whatever decisions they make, they're going to be appealing to men for the enforcement of whatever that decision is.
Okay. All right.
So that you understand.
Mm-hmm. Okay, sure. I mean, that one I agree with. Again, I agree
fundamentally you agree with everything
that for the
that
most part.
There's no actual disagreement here.
No. Because I think the issue is, okay, maybe you agree with me. I'm trying to be as charitable as possible here. Maybe you agree with me that
I don't care if you're charitable. The debate's over. There's nothing more to debate.
Yeah, you conceded all my points.
That's because they don't address anything. Like it
addresses everything.
You haven't answered to the paradox, man.
Yes, I have.
This can't. Okay, so let me try it this way. This can't happen in reverse. You understand that? Like this can't actually happen in reverse. So women.
Explain, what do you mean?
Yeah. So women could never appeal to women for their rights. They can never appeal to women as an enforcement arm for their rights. Do you agree or disagree?
Yeah, for the most part, I'd agree. Yeah.
Okay, well then you're done because that's the paradox. You dumb fuck.
How is that the paradox? I like how you're saying that I'm a dumb fuck when
I just
got beat in a debate.
I literally. So what does that make you?
If you just lost the debate to me, what does that make you? If I'm dumb?
You can't lose a debate to somebody who's not even talking about your position, Kevin. You're not even talking about it. You're like,
I am saying from the beginning.
Yeah, here's Kevin's debate style. Do you concede that blue is blue? Yeah, I just won the debate. It's like low tier sophistry. You never actually have addressed this
I
descriptor
address
for
it every time.
reality.
Every time you say that I don't
Power
address
comes
it,
from
I
the
address
top.
it right to your
Who's
face.
the enforcer?
Yes.
Men. Got it.
Yes, and hold on. You're presupposing with that statement right there that the enforcement mechanism is the one that matters the most by
Yes.
far. And I'm not saying that
Yes.
that's the case. Again, that's coming from the bottom of the power hierarchy. You're saying the bottom of the power hierarchy is the most important. I'm saying the top is the most important. The bottom of the power hierarchy can change, and it's malleable. Throughout history, it's been men because there was no technology. But as I stated earlier, with modern technology, it could easily be something like a nuke, or maybe even more in the modern day, like digital warfare or something. Who knows? Like, who knows what the future is going to be like? What matters is the people at the people at the top, who most certainly can be women, 100%.
Okay. I mean, I don't know. I literally don't know what else to say to you. You haven't actually answered to the paradox, Kevin. In fact, you agreed that women can't appeal to women to enforce their rights. They can only appeal to men. Therefore, egalitarianism actually necessarily has to be impossible. Why do you not see that?
Andrew, maybe you can just one more time, like, explain the paradox in a very succinct way.
I just did, like, the most succinct way possible. Here's the paradox. The paradox is that men never have to appeal to women for their rights, ever. They never have to. Women always have to appeal to men, and women will never be able to appeal to women for their rights because women can't enforce them. Kevin agrees with all of this. He agrees literally with everything that I'm saying is a descriptor for reality. So I don't know, since he agrees that the paradox is there, true egalitarianism can't exist, which is my point. Do you have a single argument against that, Kevin?
Yes, I've said it so many times already.
Let me
try this another way. Let me try this another way, because you're a smart guy, Andrew. So I think you know exactly what I'm talking about. You just don't want to lose. So, all right, let's take an example of somebody who, let's just say that every single common man or whatever has an IQ of 10. All right, and then you just have one single super smart person with an IQ of 200. All right, so who's the one in power there? You think the person with the IQ of 200 is going to easily be able to manipulate all of the masses of people with an IQ of 10, no matter how many there are?
Probably, at least a lot of them.
Yeah, exactly. And so who's the one in power there? It's the person at the top. That person at the top can absolutely be a woman. But more specifically, what we see throughout history is it's usually a man, and some woman manipulates that top man. This is also my speculation as to why.
Right.
Hold on, one second.
Yeah.
One more thing. This is also my speculation as to why I think women are naturally hypergamous. They will.
Yeah, I don't care about the women being hypergamous thing. I care about the argument. So on to this, unless women being hypergamous has something to do with your argument.
Yeah, it does.
What
women being hypergamous is the thing that helps put them in positions of power to influence the men in power, who then influence the enforcement arms. And that way, that's the way in which the women are able to exert their power.
All right. So let's try it let's try a different way, because I don't even think you understand what I'm saying. So we'll try it this way. Where does Kevin think rights come from?
They're social construction. I agree with you on that.
Okay. Where do they come from?
Nowhere. I mean, basically, it's like, okay, well, again, so my sort of worldview is the will to power. So there's all these different wills or collection wills that are constantly clashing against one another. I basically think that any sort of morality is actually a cope. Morality is not real. I
don't care about that. I just want to know about rights. Let's just focus on this one thing so I can see if I can break this down the easiest way possible.
Sure.
So we agree that rights themselves, or at least we'll agree with it for the sake of argument here, that rights themselves come from nowhere, right?
Yes.
They're socially constructed and they're made up, right?
Yep.
Okay, so a right is actually just the ability to enforce it, to enforce your will.
Yes.
So if your right is your ability to enforce your will, which sex can do that?
Both, because again, whoever commands the levers of force, or whatever you want to call it, that's what matters at the end of the day. So whoever is in power of that thing is what matters. It's basically like saying, like, let's say that I have I don't know, I have some. I don't
disagree that women can't manipulate men into enforcing their rights, but this again is paradoxical. So try to contend with it this different way. Now that I have your grounding and you kind of understand this basic concept, assume that a God comes down and gives you all of his powers except like one. Right. And it's the power to take away your godhood whenever they so choose. Are you equal with that God?
No.
No, you're not equal with. Why? Why aren't you equal with him though? Even though you have
the
all the things
God
that
is
they
much
have,
more
minus
powerful.
because he can take away your godhood whenever he wants, right? So who
Yeah,
has the
yeah,
power?
exactly.
So who has the power?
The
person
God,
who is
absolutely.
God, right? Who can take
Yes.
away the power anytime they so choose, not the
Yeah.
person who thinks that they
The
have
problem with this,
ultimate
I know where you're
power.
going with this, Andrew. The problem is that you're presupposing the argument, which is the entire point of the debate. You're presupposing the idea that men are the ones that give women rights, and that's the thing I fundamentally reject, and that's the thing
I
that we've
didn't
been arguing about this
presuppose.
entire time.
I didn't
You're
presuppose
presupposing right
anything
there. Okay, tell
with
me
this
where that line of thinking is going. Go ahead.
Stop with this hypothetical itself. I'm just asking you about the nature of egalitarianism. So if we're talking about the nature of equality and the nature of egalitarianism, you would agree that if there's a mechanism which can be taken away from you by something that has the degree of capacity to take it away from you, that you can't actually be equal with that thing. In this case, it would be the same thing with the power dynamics between men and women. That's what creates this great paradox, the paradox of rights. You're only saying that if women are able to manipulate men into utilizing men's power on their behalf, that would be like the person who tricks the higher deity and tricks them into giving them the same power until the deity realizes that they can take it back whenever they want. It was always paradoxical.
Okay, so let me use a little bit of, I don't know, maybe Christianity or whatever to sort of prove my point, because I think the Bible itself. Now, I don't. Granted, I don't understand the Bible as much as you do. Although I did go to Catholic school, they don't really teach you shit there in terms of Catholicism. But anyway, okay, so the devil. The devil, how does he have power in the world? You agree that the devil has more power than human beings, right?
No.
As a Christian.
No.
You don't think the devil is more powerful than human beings? No. And then,
fact,
but by the grace of God.
In fact, the opposite's true.
Okay, so how did the devil seduce Eve into, taking the apple and then influencing Adam to take the apple?
You're talking about something that has vast complexity. If you're talking about the fall of man from Eden, it's not just the devil, it's the failure of men, and it's the failure of Adam and Eve to exercise their power and will to God. Right. But they had the power to reject Satan. Satan had never had any real power other than what was willed to Satan.
Yeah, hold on. His power was the seduction. He seduced them into doing what he wanted.
Yes,
right?
And that can be done. But ultimately, the great paradox there is that they never had to do it. Right. So this is the paradox. Well, that's the paradoxical nature. Women fucking have to do it. Do you understand the difference? They fucking have to. They don't have a choice. Like, they don't get to be like, no. That's the paradoxical nature.
Sure. I mean, in different
Adam and Eve
ways,
could just look at
sure.
it. No. Now pretend that Adam and Eve had the devil who was there, right? And they were like, and the devil went, no, you fucking have to eat the fruit. Grabbed the fruit, shoved it in their face, made them eat the shit. Just stuffed it in their face. You have to eat it, right? That's the difference. That's the paradoxical differentiation.
That's the entire point. The fact that you brought that up shows that you are taking this 100% from a masculine worldview, which is why this doesn't make any sense.
It makes total. Listen, I'm telling you, women can't say no. They can't say no. If men decide they have no rights, they can't be like, yes, I do. They can't. They can. Men can, but women can't. So you can't have egalitarianism.
It doesn't matter. You keep treating both of them as a monolith. Right, the vast majority of
I mean, in this particular case,
what gives you
men
rights?
Men would
Andrew,
be.
What gives
men
you
would
personally?
Be as the enforcement, basically a monolith.
So, what gives you personally, Andrew, any sort of rights?
I don't think I have rights.
Who's bestowed that onto you?
I don't think I have rights.
So you don't think any human being has rights? I'm not saying like ontologically, I'm talking like specifically like within the confines of the law, let's say, which is a social construction.
Yeah, so just enforcement. That's it. That's all it gives you rights is force.
Yeah, from other people, right?
Men, yeah.
Yeah, from other men who are higher up in the hierarchy. Not necessarily
they don't necessarily need to be higher up in the hierarchy, no.
Well, how else would they enforce their will then?
With a bullet.
Yeah, because they're at the top of the hierarchy.
No, they're not. They don't need to be at the top of the hierarchy. In fact, they can be at the top of the hierarchy, and someone who's below them can still kill them with a bullet.
Yeah, but they're probably going to be defended by people who have more bullets. And also, if they're at the top of the hierarchy, they're pretty smart, so they know that's not
been all the
happen.
Social revolutions historically. They've had plenty of defense, and still the population's able to bring them down to their knees or kill whoever's in power, or
then what happens?
completely. If they create an entirely new power structure where men again are at the top.
No. Yeah, exactly. The same
Yeah.
exact thing repeats itself, where there's
Yeah.
a new establishment in place and then there's
I
new
agree.
hierarchy in place. The people at the top of the hierarchy still end up calling the shots for the people below at the bottom of the hierarchy.
Yeah, I'm not disagreeing with any of that. What's your point? The hierarchy at the top's always meant, though. It has to necessarily be.
No.
It always
No.
is.
The
It
hierarchy at
always
the bottom.
is.
No. Look, okay, so this is where we can probably agree, and I think we've both agreed to this earlier, just in different terms. The bottom of the hierarchy, the enforcement arm, always has to be men for the most part.
Yes.
It's possible in the future it might be able to be women too. Again, just with technology and all
So
that.
that is the real hierarchy then.
No,
the real
That's
hierarchy.
the bottom of the hierarchy.
No,
You just
no,
admitted that it's the bottom.
no,
I'm talking about
stop.
the top, which is what matters.
Stop. It's not. The real when you're talking about a hierarchy, you are talking about a monolith then. You're talking about a singular organization or a singular monolithic piece that has different parts to it, different pieces, so you're saying only the crown is the important piece. And I'm saying the crown, hang on, let me finish. I'm saying the crown's important, sure. Okay, but the reason that if you go and you read like Machiavelli, right, that he talks about this often, how it's actually better to be feared than loved, for instance, is because oftentimes in the Prince, especially, as they discuss these different groups kind of taking out the crown or having some type of social revolution to get rid of whatever the existing hierarchy is to instill their brand new hierarchy. That's men essentially enforcing whatever they think is their right.
Got it. I'm glad you brought up Machiavelli.
Or this type of thing, right? That's what they're doing. That's what they're doing.
Hold on. I'm glad you brought up Machiavelli, the author of The Prince. So the Prince that he's talking about in that novel, did he have the largest army that allowed him to get to the top, or was it something else?
Well, he was talking about multiple princes throughout the book. So
yeah, but there's one main one, Cesare Borgia. Cesare Borgia was the main one that he's talking about in that book. Yeah, and he was actually created.
Yeah, so he
created that book.
I haven't read The Prince in years. But get to your point.
My entire point is that in that book itself, it establishes that a good leader at the top is what wins wars and what wins influences, not the enforcement arm or the largeness of the army. It's the person at the top, not the person at the bottom.
I don't disagree. There's still no disagreement with this.
You said that you do disagree because you say that it's the enforcement arm.
We're talking about again the principle. What's the principle we're talking about? We're talking about the principle of egalitarianism, equality. Do you understand that? Do you understand that the crux of this entire thing is based around egalitarianism? Men and women are equal. So if the crux of this is men and women are equal, whichever part of this hierarchy that you point to doesn't matter. I'm saying they can't be equal. That's the paradox, because their enforcement will always come from men. They can never actually be equal to men. That's the whole point. That's the entire argument.
Andrew, I don't think, Kevin, let me see if I can clear this up. Andrew, I don't think Kevin is saying that men and women are equal or that we should live in an egalitarian society. All I think he's getting at is simply that women can be in positions of power, and therefore it's not as easy as men just take rights away from women. Did I sum up?
And also, based on the way that they express their power, they are able to will themselves to get rights through the manipulation of men. Yes.
Did I accurately describe what you believe?
I understand what he's saying.
Okay.
But the reason that this has been very frustrating for me is because he doesn't seem to understand that when we're taught the whole thing revolves around equality and egalitarianism. What I'm pointing out is the illusion of equality, the illusion of egalitarianism. I'm pointing out that it's an illusion for women to believe that they have rights that don't come from men, because they actually can't have rights that come from women. They can't. You understand the paradox there? They can't do it. And you've agreed over and over that they can't do it. And so then we get into like talking about all kinds of shit that really has nothing to do with that.
Okay. So
hang on, let me finish and I'll give it to you. So then you say to me, you're like, concede this is true. And I'm like, yeah, sure, that's true. Concede this is true. I'm like, yeah, sure, that's true too. Well, there's no debate. It's like, there's not really, because I don't think you disagree with my point.
I do. I've said multiple times over and over again that I do.
Yeah, I know.
Everybody watching can rewind it if they want to. Okay, let me try to frame it this way. At this point, I'm not. You're just. I'm not trying to influence you. Maybe the audience or something at this point. But okay, maybe just try to make it more understandable. Okay, so let's say that there's a black. So when you go to war, Let's say this medieval times before guns are invented, whatever. You need a blacksmith, right? A blacksmith is the one that's creating the weapons. The blacksmith is technically the one that has the weapons, right? Weapons are the thing that kill people. All right. But are the blacksmiths the ones in power? No. The people who the blacksmiths work for are the ones in power. They could easily just take the sword away and then kill the blacksmith. And then, but what you're saying is that it's almost like the blacksmiths are the ones in power because they're the ones that technically have the force to begin with. I'm saying that force can easily be taken away through manipulative means, such as what women do.
There's no disagreement. So I don't understand why you don't get that. Like, there's no disagreement on any of that because we keep saying there is, but I'm like, but I agree with this. But the descriptor of reality still doesn't change as to the paradoxical nature of people can't force their own rights who say they're equal with you, the people who can. That's insane. Don't you understand that's insane? Don't you understand that I can concede to all this like externalities that you bring up and it doesn't actually solve this paradox? Like, this paradox has been around for 2,000 years.
It's not a paradox.
It is a paradox.
The entire point. If you wanted me to go really deep here, I can actually make this as an example of Christianity itself. How did Christianity will itself to power in the Roman Empire and take over the Roman Empire? How did it happen?
Well, I mean, that's complex, but the empire itself was somewhat decadent, and it didn't really take it over. The empire split into two. And you had actually two different branches basically competing against each other. So
let's say, sorry, real quick. Let's say the Western Roman Empire then, not the Byzantine Empire. Let's say the Western Roman Empire, which still existed about, I think, 200 years after the Byzantine Empire existed. So within those 200 years, paganism was supplanted by Christianity. How did that happen? Did it happen through brute force with sometimes an enforcement arm, like you said?
Yeah, it happened a lot of times by brute force. Sometimes it didn't happen that way. But what I think mostly happened was that you had male evangelists, like the apostles and things like this, who would then evangelize the other men who were inside of those societies. And then those men would begin to follow those moral codes and lay those moral codes down. And then other men would begin to either adhere to those moral codes or they would be prosecuted under those moral codes. The enforcement arm would always be exactly the same, though, across the board. It always is.
Yeah. So the way in which basically what you're saying is the way that the Christianity willed itself and took over the Roman Empire was largely through non-force means that weren't through force. Because every time that was, and the way that which it happened, if you guys want my viewpoints on this, where I come from with this, I encourage you to read The Genealogy of Morals by Friedrich Nietzsche. But basically, the slaves, right? The Roman society was mostly slaves and like a few masters. Yet every single time, and they completely outnumbered the masters, right? Yet every single time the slaves tried to revolt, they would get crushed, right? Because the Romans at the top were so powerful, they could command armies, they could hire mercenaries. They were very strategic, whereas these slaves didn't really know how to fight, right? So the way in which Christianity proliferated,
not during the gladiator rebellions. That wasn't the way it was in the gladiator
rebellions. They got crushed. Hold on, the gladiator rebellions got crushed. Eventually, yes.
Eventually. Yes. But the thing is they were also heavily outnumbered. They were outgunned. They were outmanned. And oftentimes when they're fighting in 5-to-1 odds, they would win. So the thing is that, again, though, this is men pitting against men for the dominance of power and rights, which is always the case. Yes, single time.
This is different. Hold on. I'm talking about Christianity, though. With Christianity, the way that it spread and the way that it took over was not through that. It was through appealing to the hearts and minds of the people rather than the masters.
Men, yeah, correct.
Yeah. Well, both. But yeah, basically.
No, it was the men.
There were a lot of women who were.
Go ahead. Name a prominent woman of the time they were appealing to. Go ahead, Kevin.
I don't know. My entire argument is that a lot of these women you'll never know.
There isn't one.
The entire point.
That's why.
The entire point of what I'm saying in this argument is that women express their power differently. For all the women that I listed earlier,
I don't disagree.
There are probably tons of women who had a major influence on men. Okay, let me give you this example. Constantine's mother. What was she? Was she Christian or no? Constantine.
I don't think she was, because Constantine was the one who was converted, right?
I'm almost positive Constantine's mother was.
Maybe she was. I don't remember. I don't know.
Somebody can look that up really quickly.
Yeah. But Constantine converted to Christianity. I know that was like the big deal.
I think he converted because his mom was Christian, or that was a big influence, right? So that's even just that. If that's true, then that's case in point right there, that Christianity,
that women can influence men.
Helped.
Yes, nobody's disputed that for the 8,000th time.
Yeah, they can influence men.
Yeah, we know,
and
Kevin.
They can influence the enforcement arm, which is the entire point of the argument.
They can,
right?
They can influence it, but the thing is that if the enforcement arm says no, women have no recourse and men do. That's the point, Kevin.
They do have the recourse.
What's the recourse?
If the enforcement arm said, you're acting as if there's only one enforcement arm, right? The entire point of what we kept,
keep on switching, you keep on changing what I'm saying, and you do this over and over and over again.
That's
so try this again.
If this ain't the pot calling the kettle black, I don't know what is.
If men decide that they don't like the status quo, they can enforce a different status quo, and women can't. They can't do that.
And they will be met with resistance
by other men.
Yes,
that's correct.
Who a lot of times could also be under the influence of women as well, especially
even if
they're
something right. But even if they're under the influence of women, this is part of that great paradox, which is that even if they're under the influence of a singular woman or a singular man or whatever it is, women can never appeal to women to enforce women's rights collectively. That it can't be done. Do you understand that? They have to enforce it through men.
They can, from the standpoint of they can all collectively come together and agree to manipulate their men to get what they want, which has and does happen. Actually, this happened, I think, in the 90s, or actually it might have been sooner. But you remember that really like cringy thing?
It can happen. I've said this again. It can happen. The point being, though, is that they can't have this enforcement mechanism through women. Not that women can't manipulate men who are the enforcers of rights to enforce their rights, because they can. Rather, very simply, women can't go to other women to be the enforcers of their own rights. Only men can be the enforcers of women's rights.
Physical enforcement.
Well, that is the enforcement. That is the enforcement. There's nothing to argue here.
The entire point of what I was saying is that force doesn't have to be physical. Exerting your will does not have to be physical. Women do it through manipulation. The devil does it through manipulation.
Yes.
Right. So it's almost like you are. It's almost like I'm taking the Christian worldview and you're not. It's almost like you're the Nietzsche.
But if the devil, assuming for a second that you imply or apply this manipulation, and the person says, "No, I'm not going to be manipulated," men have recourse. Women don't. That's the distinction.
Hold on. You're assuming that people who get manipulated know that they're getting manipulated. How often is that
literally baked into my hypothetical? Assuming for a second that you cannot,
false.
Assuming for a second that women can't manipulate men. They can't manipulate whatever this group is, which has also happened many times, by the way. They can't do it. They can't manipulate them. They can't coerce them. Can they do anything? Can they do anything, and can men do something? Just answer this.
Hold on.
Answer
the question.
That
being manipulated is a choice? Hold on. Do you think being manipulated is a choice? It's like, I think this woman's manipulating me. I'm going to choose to be manipulated.
That's
that's
ridiculous. What I'm saying is,
but you just said that that's the case.
Yes, you can apply manipulative tactics, and they don't work, Kevin.
The entire point of seduction.
Again, you can apply manipulative tactics, and they don't work. Right.
Okay. What I am arguing is that they do work.
So women in the Middle East
throughout history.
So women in Iran are not being able to be very coercive towards the men, Kevin.
Well, I guess they're not very good at manipulating.
I guess not. But the thing is that if
women in the West,
again, if they're trying to do this coercion and it doesn't work, they have no recourse. They have no recourse because the men won't give them any. So they're still appealing to something greater to them over and over and over again, whether it's through manipulation or whatever. They're still appealing to somebody who has greater singular autonomy and authority than they do to enforce their rights.
Physical strength is required.
It's not just physical strength,
which I agree with.
I don't think it's just that. I also think there's a mentality difference. I think that men have less problem killing people, all sorts of different things like this that go into that as well. But the whole point is,
I agree with that. No.
How many times do I have to say this? They can't, even if they're being manipulated, they have no recourse outside of that, and men do. So they're always appealing to men.
It doesn't matter if they don't have any recourse outside of it.
That is the
most effective. That is the most effective method to influence people, is through manipulation and being able to psychologically manipulate people to do what you want. That is how Christianity took over the Roman Empire. that is how the devil has so much influence over everybody, even though he doesn't like, it's not like the devil comes up and just starts beating the shit out of people. No, he influences and seduces them through basically psychological and spiritual means.
So
You're proving my point.
So ultimately, how Christianity is influenced is that men who convert over to Christianity become the enforcement arm for the Christianity. So assume for a second that you had a person, and this did happen oftentimes in pagan tribes, where tribe leaders would convert to Christianity and their soldiers would not. And so they removed that tribal leader because now the enforcers are gone. He had no power left. This happened with pagans all the time. It was a big problem inside of these pagan nations. In fact, it was a problem in Japan with the daimyos. The daimyos also would convert over to Christianity, and their samurai said, no, we want to stick with Buddhism. That was a big problem for them as well. So if you don't have the enforcement arm that's there that you can appeal to, which is going to be men to protect whatever the rights are that you think everybody should adhere to, you're fucked, Kevin. You're fucked. There's nothing there. And women never have that recourse external to men. Neither do men. All rights fundamentally come down to men.
Okay, yes.